We are your volunteer representatives appointed by the county executive and confirmed by the county council to advise on matters involving agriculture and agricultural land preservation. We review and recommend on issues relating to existing and prospective agricultural easements. Additionally, we make recommendations to the county regarding agricultural zoning issues and other issues related to agriculture. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Pete Gutwald has a few things to tell us.
Well, thank you, John, and welcome everybody. I just really wanted to welcome the new board members, Brenda Stromer and Holly Gilmore, to the board. Looking forward to working with you, and thanking all the board members for their hard work over the past years and the work that will be done over the next couple of years. Obviously, just what Mr. Merriman spoke about, from everything from ranking our farms and making use of our county agricultural preservation dollars to the best of their abilities. You know, identifying those quality farms is an important aspect of your efforts and the efforts of the county, but also those related to zoning and land use and protecting the most significant economic engine in Baltimore County is the agricultural industry. So I welcome you all and welcome the new members. And thank you for participating and volunteering your services. I will apologize. I am going to have to leave. I have another meeting at 6 o'clock, virtually, of course. But once again, I just wanted to thank everybody. Megan, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. At this time, I'd like the board members and the staff to introduce themselves and tell what their role in farming affiliation is. My name is John Merriman. I'm a corn and soybean farmer from Upper Co, Maryland.
Steve Meyer from Whitehall, Maryland. Gary Peter Cats.
Holly Gilmore, Moncton Equestrian Program.
And for staff, it's Wally Lippincott, administrator of the county's land preservation program and working in the Department of Planning.
Joe Wiley. I also work for the Department of Planning. I've worked with Wally for the past 4 years now, Wally.
Seems like a long time, doesn't it?
And I'm Megan Benjamin. I'm also in the Department of Planning. This is my 1 year this week. I've been here 1 year. And prior to that, I was with MET for a long time. So glad to be here.
Thank you very much.
And what about, we do have two ex officio listed folks for this, for the board. And one is with the University of Maryland Extension, Erica Crow, and the other is Soil Conservation District, Jim Enzer, but they do not regularly attend. Instead, we have an ex officio member, Ann Jones, who does regularly attend and administers a lot of our partner programs. So Ann, if you want to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. This is Ann Jones, and as Wally said, I pushed the wrong button and unmuted myself by mistake. So I know you're all thankful for that. But I do land preservation work in different areas, rural legacy work, and I'm always interested to see what the board is involved with. So thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to call on Callie Madigan to speak on ethics and financial disclosure.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Kelly Madigan, and I am the new Inspector General for Baltimore County. I also have this role as being the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission, and so I want to give probably about a 20-minute presentation to everyone about ethics and how the ethics laws relate to you as members of this board. Anyone that's employed by Baltimore County government or a member of a board, the ethics laws apply to you and they're mandatory. And so my agenda here tonight is to try to give you an overview of what the ethics laws were created for, how they apply to your work as board members, and talk a little bit about financial disclosures, which your board is one of the boards that's required to fill them out, why they're important. But always know if you have any questions about anything in particular, I would encourage you to just call me. So much of these ethics questions are factual based and can turn on any given fact. So it's important to me to kind of highlight some of the broad topics, but know that you can always call if you have questions. So Joe, I think you're in charge of my slideshow. So next slide. Okay. Well, next slide. Okay. All right. So this is a quote that I have because my career has always been as a public servant. I was a Baltimore City prosecutor, and then I worked at the Maryland State Prosecutor's Office before working for county government. But the whole idea of government and ethics for government is that public service is based on public trust. And in order to ensure that, the kind of easy spiel I give about this is if you don't belong to Baltimore County government or aren't part of a Baltimore County board, you're an outsider. You don't necessarily know what Chairman Merriman or Mr. Gutwald or Mr. Wiley's particular individual role within county government is. So this is the whole idea that from the outside looking in, we have to have a standard code of conduct that everyone has to follow and apply, so that everyone can feel confident that we are all working on behalf of Baltimore County government or on behalf of the Agricultural Board, and that we're not working on behalf of Mr. Gutwald or Mr. Wiley or Miss Gilmore or any other personal interest. And that is something that's unique to government work. So if you haven't worked for government, it's this whole idea of using the government for the greater good and not for special deals for ourselves. Next slide, Wiley. Mr. Wiley. Should I call you Joe?
Joe's fine, yeah.
Joe, okay. Anyone feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions, but I'm just going to kind of roll through this. And if you want to use the chat box, feel free to do that. Okay, Joe, can you have them pop up? There you go. So there are 5 main areas of ethics laws that this code of conduct, which is set forth in the Baltimore County Code, is aimed at preventing. Conflict of interest. Everyone kind of knows what those are. Those are the idea that, Holly, if you have a horse farm or you're in that business and something comes before the board that directly relates to that, you shouldn't be in a position where you are voting on something that you have a financial interest in. They can be as simple as your wife works for ABC Electric and you're in procurement, and ABC Electric is trying to get a contract with Baltimore County. It's both the actual conflict of interest and the appearance of a conflict of interest. Secondary employment. I'm not sure that this is really going to apply to you, but this is the idea that if you work for Baltimore County government, you shouldn't have a secondary job that perhaps could compete with Baltimore County government. This is traditionally for police officers or correctional officers that want to work security or want to have a contract, firemen that want to be able to provide EMS services or something on the weekend. Typically, you'd have to get permission from the Ethics Commission for that. Gifts. This is kind of an easy one. No member of Baltimore County government or a member of a board should be accepting or soliciting a gift. A gift is anything of financial value. Prestige of office. This is about the idea of not misusing Baltimore County government and the seal that it stands for any personal gain. And then financial disclosures, which we're going to go over in more detail. Next slide, Joe. So again, conflict of interest provision. This is the idea that you can't work on a matter where you or your family member has an interest. So I have some examples here that don't necessarily relate to the board, but this again, Holly, not to pick on you, but this would be the idea. I just happen to remember what you said you did, that if you have a horse farm or are in the horse farming business, you shouldn't be voting on a matter, hearing a matter, subject to a matter that's either an actual conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest, whether that perhaps maybe the land next to your horse farm is up for sale, and depending on what that price of the land is going to sell for, that might have an impact on your property values. It's that kind of idea. And from the outside looking in, the problem with the conflict of interest provision is it's always better I think, to try to ask for permission, not necessarily ask for forgiveness. If it's something that your gut tells you, I'm too close to this, this is too close to home, you shouldn't really be involved in it. But it's also something that's very factual based. So if you have a question about whether or not this applies or how tangentially down the road the conflict is, I would just encourage you to ask Wally or to call me. Sorry again, Holly, for picking on you, but I just happened to remember what your employment was. Next slide. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, this is what the actual.
Kelly?
Yes.
So for example, we vote on easements. That's a big part of their task. And we certainly rely on the board members to use their expertise. So for instance, John knows grain farming and cattle farming. So, he gives us his opinion on ranking these different quality, these farms. So certainly we have a significant number of horse farms in the county. So, we would certainly treasure Holly's expertise on those, but that's not a conflict when it's kind of a generic farm. It's only if it's, like you said, one next to her. Correct. Or one in which she has engaged with some financial interest.
Correct. And
okay,
thanks, Wally, for bringing that up, because it's important that everyone that's on this board is done so because of your expertise. No different than the planning board or other boards. I mean, you have the background that would you an expert in these types of issues. So it's not that you can't give an expert opinion. It's that if you have a specific interest in it, whether you're going to benefit from it or whether your business is going to benefit from it, you shouldn't be involved in that decision. Again, I think the best example is somebody has questions about horse farms in general or easements in general. Of course, they're going to defer to Holly and the other members because you have the actual practical experience as well as your employment background that lends you to give good advice for this. And that's what the role of the board is, to give recommendations. But if, for example, the property next door to Holly's is coming up for an easement, I think maybe Holly picks up the phone and calls me or calls Wally or says something, I'm not sure that this is going to necessarily benefit me, but this is how it could be perceived from the outside. I always think it's better to err on the side of being cautious and trying to avoid any appearance of conflict, because the worst case scenario is somebody files an ethics complaint about you and you've done nothing wrong, and then you have to go through the rigmarole of having an ethics complaint. And in this day and age, I'll just say, I'm new to the county. I started in January. But since COVID, with all of these board meetings being virtual, more and more individuals that might not have come to the traditional meetings are watching these recorded sessions and are making complaints about what people are and aren't doing. So that's kind of like a little bit of a word of caution. So this is the actual law that just says a public official, that's everyone that's a board member, as well as Baltimore County employees, may not participate in matters where they have a qualified relative have a specific interest. So this is just this legalese defining what this is. Again, I think this is kind of a gut check, but it's very fact dependent, and you should call me if you have any questions about this. Next slide. Outside employment, we can go through this quickly, Joe. Shouldn't have a job that interacts with Baltimore County. For example, if Baltimore County was going to have a procurement with Mr. Merriman selling, I forget, Mr. Merriman, was it soybeans?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's say that all of a sudden Baltimore County was in a dire need for 10,000 pounds of soybeans, and they wanted to perhaps purchase them from your farm. That might not necessarily be a secondary job, so to speak, but that might be something that could be a perceived conflict of interest, and or, the idea that you are a farmer. This is kind of hard. It doesn't really apply to board members, but it's the idea of trying to preserve your work on behalf of Baltimore County. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. Next slide, Joe. This is the actual law. A public official may not have a secondary employment with any entity that's doing business with the employee or governmental unit. Again, this doesn't really apply to you all as board members because this is a volunteer position, but this is the idea that Pete, as the director of the planning agency, he shouldn't also be selling soybeans to Baltimore County. Is that fair, Pete?
Sure. I thought that would never happen. I thought you were going to go with the land use thing.
Well, there you go. There you go. I caught you right before you had to leave. So there you go.
Right.
Next slide, Joe. Gifts. Great. Public official may not solicit any gifts. Next slide. Directly facilitate the solicitation of a gift. A gift is anything, a transfer of economic value. So this is very simply the idea that you can't, if somebody comes to the board and has a question about an easement being passed, let's say Sally Joe asked for an easement and it was passed, you can't then turn around to Sally Joe and say, can you give me $50 for passing that easement? It's kind of the classic example of a gift. Next slide, Joe. But a gift also works in the opposite way as well. Sally Joe can't come up to you after the meeting and say, thank you so much for passing that easement for me. I want to give you $50, right? That's acceptance of a gift, which as a public official, you are prohibited from. Misuse of office, prestige of office. You shouldn't use the office to gain a benefit for yourself or another. This is the idea that if your board had letterhead or something, you as an individual, Mr. Chairman Merriman, could write a letter of recommendation on somebody's behalf, or say they've done a great job, or you would endorse them. But you, Chairman Merriman, as the chair of the Baltimore Agricultural Land Preservation Board, can't make that same endorsement. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any questions about that? Okay, next slide. We're going quick. This is the actual law. Public official may not intentionally use the prestige of office for that public official's private gain or that of another. Next slide. Confidential information. I'm not sure how often you would come into possession of confidential information with your work on the board, but obviously it's something that you are required not to disclose in the ordinary course of business.
Kelly, they do a ranking, and the ranking is confidential. The state requires it to be confidential for a year.
Okay.
So that's a good example.
Okay, great. And so everyone on the board knows that with that confidential ranking, if they shouldn't come out at a cocktail party, obviously. Next slide. Okay, financial disclosures. So we're going to take a minute to go over these, and I'm also happy if you want me to. Can you go back one slide, Joe? Thanks. To pull up the form and go over it if you want me to. I'm happy to do that.
Anne had a question in the chat.
Okay, let me get the chat. And all I see in my chat is "see you all later" from Pete.
Oh, she sent it to me privately. Sorry. Anne, I don't know the question, but is there no limit? Is there no limit for an unsubstantial gift? Say someone gives you a framed photo of the farm after preservation.
That's a great question, Anne. The gift exception and prohibition really applies to things that are over $20. A heartfelt memento or a framed photo is not necessarily considered a gift. There are lots of rules and regulations about that, but it's traditionally anything over $25 value. It's kind of more like having somebody take you out to lunch or dinner. Somebody giving you a plaque or recognizing you or giving you a framed photo of something is not traditionally considered a gift under the ethics rules. There are more exceptions to the gift prohibition than any other. And again, if you have any questions, I would encourage you to call, but they're not trying to capture the nominal things.
Now, can I go on that real quick too?
Sure.
Like sometimes we've been to certain farms where they've given us little gift baskets, like when they've
Totally fine if it's like under $25. If the gift basket contains, box seats to the Ravens playoff games, that's a problem. But if the gift basket is sunflowers and a pen or something small like a memento, that is not, again, the idea behind the gift is for the appearance of impropriety. Somebody from the outside wouldn't want to say, well, you only gave that person that easement that you would have given them anyways because they gave you this gift. They tried to buy your vote. They tried to buy your agreement. That's what it's trying to protect against, this like backdoor deals. So if everyone's getting one and it's a nominal thing, like a grab bag kind of thing, that's not what the ethics rules are primarily aimed at doing, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. So financial disclosures. The reason behind financial disclosures is this idea. This is this kind of hokey thing I say about them. When government was very small, back in the common law, everybody knew everything about everybody else. Everybody knew who the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker was. There were 4 people that were in charge, and you knew all about them. You knew what their wife did. You knew where they lived. You knew what encompassed that person who was working for the government. As government has grown and the decision-making of government grows, people aren't aware who anybody is. So this is the idea that you sit on the board and you make recommendations to the county. So in the idea of transparency, to try to be as transparent that you are in fact working on behalf of Baltimore County and not yourself, this is the only tool, and it's not a perfect one, to ensure that everyone understands where your interests lie. So I am going to actually pull up the form so we can go over it together, because this board, Wally, this board files Form 2, correct? There's
Yes.
there's so many boards I can never remember which ones file which, but pretty sure you guys file Form 2. So let me share my screen, which I think I can. Share.
I have to give you permission.
Oh, give me permission so I can share my screen. Share my screen. Can everybody just give me a thumbs up if you can see this?
You might want to make it larger.
Okay, let me make it larger. Oh, where'd it go? Here it is. Can everyone see this?
No.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the form that your board fills out. And this form asks for your name, the board of commission, your email address. Again, I'm hoping that these are going to be online next year. So the first one that it's asking about, real property interests. They want to know whether or not you have property that interacts with your board or commission. It's very specific. They don't want to know about the rental house you have down in Ocean City if it doesn't ever interact with the board. But back to my example about Holly and the farm next door to her, they want to know that Holly lives at 123 Main Street. So if 124 Main Street is up for sale and Holly votes for that sale, again, it's not a perfect, but it's the way to provide transparency to the fact that Holly is saying affirmatively, I own this property, but I'm still allowed to vote on this property next door. So it's only ones that are going to interact with the board. So that's important to remember. They want to know if it's your home address versus a property. Is it directly relatable to you? Second one is interests in corporations, including limited liability. But again, these are interests in those corporations that otherwise are under the authority of your board. So if you happen to own a smelling salt company that never is going to interact with the Baltimore County Agricultural Land Preservation Board, it doesn't matter. They're focused on things that are they're focused on things in your private life that are going to come before the board that are going to be asking you to vote in both your capacity as a private citizen as well as a board citizen. Does that make sense? Okay, hearing nothing, I assume it does. So then the next one is interest in non-corporate business, again, that did business with your board. So you have to think about all of the entities that are doing business with your board. Traditionally, if anybody owns a company or has another interest, that's one or two. Here you go, Anne. Here's about the gifts. During the reporting period, did you receive a gift in excess of $50 or a series of gifts that have a cumulative value of $100 or more? And so then you would have to list them. And this, again, it's not perfect, but this is the idea that if 123 Main Street Farms gave you a gift, you would list that gift. So if anyone wanted to say, oh, you only voted for 123 Main Street to have that easement because you received this gift, it's the idea of, nope, I'm being transparent. This is what they gave me. I would have voted to do that anyways. The flip side, though, is let's say 123 Main Street gives you a gift and you don't report it and somebody finds out about it, then there's all of a sudden this appearance of impropriety where it was probably just a technical mistake. You know, the easiest example of this, not to pick on the former mayor of Baltimore City, but was Catherine Pugh, and she was filling out her financial disclosure. She failed to include Healthy Holly LLC as one of her businesses. So this wouldn't necessarily apply to you because that business wouldn't be doing business with your board. Okay. So the next one is if you have an office. Holly, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
Oh, so you just popped up as speaking. I don't know. So this is Schedule E, officers, directorships, salaried positions. Again, these are, do you have any of these positions that do business with your board? Any debts you owe? This is, again, you can have credit card debt, but if it didn't do business with your board or commission, you don't need to list it. But if you have debt next with a company or business that comes before your board, you need to list it, again, to try to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Family members employed by the board or commission, kind of going through this quickly, but I think everyone gets the point. And again, if you have any questions about this, feel free to call me. Employment and business ownerships.
Hey, Kelly,
yes?
this is Wally. This is a probably stupid question, but so
No
I'm
such
thinking
thing as a stupid question.
So I'm thinking they get this report, they get a notification whenever it is that they have to fill the report out. So I'm presuming then what they're entering is what has happened in the past, right? Because they can't know in advance who they might be dealing with. So they would be filling a report out for the last 6 months or last year's activities, correct?
So that's a great transition, Wally. So the way to explain this is the ethics are 1 year behind. So you right now are serving as board members for 2020. Next year in 2021, you will file your financial disclosure statement covering what you did the preceding year for 2020. So, for example, you said earlier that you have 2 new board members. Those 2 new board members have 60 days. Nope, I'm sorry, they have 30 days to file a financial disclosure form for last year. And that's because September of 2020, you might be voting on something that nobody would know what your interests are unless you had filed that financial disclosure statement covering calendar year 2019. Obviously, you'll file the one for 2020 when 2020 is over, but it's trying to capture that transparency on either end. Does that make sense? It's confusing in the sense that you're filling out the form in 2021 for the prior year, but the idea is to capture everything that happened during 2020. You can't.
Yes, that makes. Have we sent one to Holly? Have you received one? I have not sent it to her.
Oh, I'm happy to send one to you, Holly. Who else do I need to send them to?
To Brenda.
To Holly and to Brenda. I don't know that I have their email addresses, but I'm also happy, Wally, to send one forwarded on to both of them.
That'd be great. Thanks.
That's kind of the biggest part of my role for you guys as board members. Obviously, I want you to know I'm a resource if you have any questions, but you're really going to be hearing from me about turning in your financial disclosures. And I totally understand that they're a pain and that they're not a priority, but they are important because they do provide that layer of transparency for government. And even if you disagree with the premise for them, it's a uniform thing that everybody does. So they are due April 30th of every year. Traditionally, we try to give you 4 months to fill them in. And there are late fees associated with not filing them on time. We were going to do late fees last year for the first time, but then COVID hit. And I really want to work with everyone. I think, is it Steve, you and I spoke because right around the times they're due, it's like your really busy time with the flower business. Is that right, Steve?
No, it's Scott.
That'd be Scott.
Scott. Okay. Sorry. I'm remembering that incorrectly. I want to be flexible with you, but they're kind of like your taxes in that when January rolls around, for those of you that have been on the board for a long time, you have to do this financial disclosure. It really is kind of a 10-minute exercise, especially when they're going to be online. You can just log in and it's hopefully going to auto-populate last year's answers that you can just review and submit. There's no harm in turning them in, early. No reason to wait until April 30th. But again, they're done to provide that layer of transparency as a board that gives recommendations. So any other questions?
Now, Kelly, this is unrelated, but we need to figure out how to give me permission back.
Oh, let me give you permission back because I'm going to leave here pretty quick.
Well, you could stay and run the meeting.
My husband and my kids are probably having dinner. Switch audio. I've had to do a lot of things with WebEx, but I've never had to give permission back.
Because it just says share file, new whiteboard. It's not giving me the option to share my screen.
Control Alt Delete on my end says, what if I leave? If I leave, do you then go back?
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I really, I want to thank Wally for inviting me to come to speak to you guys. It's my mission to try to reach everybody out there just to kind of remind them how ethics is a living, breathing thing and how it can interact with your board or your employment. Again, feel free to call me if you have any questions. No such thing as a stupid answer. I'm happy to hear from you more often than less often.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
I'm going to try to leave and see if that gives the screen back. How about that?
Okay.
Because if it doesn't work, I won't know.
Is that ethical?
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Hannah Turner. She will speak to us on the mouth.
Hannah, you there? Are you on mute?
I'm still here.
Yes, I'm sorry. Here I am. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the MOUSE program. So before I go into any kind of a spiel, let me ask if any of you have any questions or if there's anyone out there that is not familiar with our program.
Hannah, we thought that, this is Wally, maybe if you describe briefly the state board, since many of the folks here have participated with ag easements through mouth, but they probably haven't been down to the state board. So we're thinking if you could sort of describe, the process. We're thinking, they make the recommendation, we carry it forward to you, and then you take it to your board. Maybe if you would give them insight into how that part works, that would be helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we get a request, one that you all have approved, hopefully approved, I will prepare a memo with maps and the information that was provided from the county, from your board, and bring it before the state board. They will, when we put information together for them, we take into account what the county has heard and approved and compare that along with the statutes that govern MALS and regulations and our internal policies. And most of the time, we have already discussed specific requests with Wally, Megan, or Joe, and we have an idea of what's coming. So that part is usually fairly quick once we get the recommendation from your board. We will present the item, and there will be discussion among the board members. There are sometimes questions for landowners. Our board really encourages landowners to attend board meetings for any information that is not in anything that we've presented. And usually Wally or Megan or Joe will also attend the meeting in case there is information that we don't have. We can't always anticipate what board members are going to ask, and I'm sure that you have all been in that position of asking questions that aren't, straight line off of a memo. And everything is an open session. We do, from time to time, take matters into a closed session if we need advice of counsel on any particular issue. The board votes right away, and we then will send an approval letter to the landowner letting them know if there are any requirements that they need to fulfill in order for their request to come to fruition. That's a very general explanation, and one that probably doesn't surprise anyone. And it's hard talking in a vacuum because we're not, it's very specific, a very specific thing. I could tell you, for example, the applications that were submitted, it's a little more concrete. When we get those applications that the county staff has worked on very hard for months, we here, myself and two other administrators, we vet them. We go through to be sure that we have all the information we need. And sometimes we, in reading the backup documents, deeds, other documents that affect the property, we will consider things that maybe the local board has not considered because they're not as familiar with some of the regulations and laws that we deal with every day. Once we vet those, they are sent in a group by county to Department of General Services, to their real estate unit, and they are reviewed there and farmed out for appraisal. And when we the appraisals back, we start other processes that help us ultimately put everything together to make offers. Of course, the first and foremost and actually only device that we use to make offers is the ranking that comes from the county. We do exactly what the county says as far as an order, but we do need additional information in order to put our offers together. We need to find, we need the appraised value. We have to figure an easement value, which we do with an ag value formula. There are other pieces of the pie that we put together to understand each property backwards, forwards, upside down, inside out. So once we have all that information together, then we have a sense, we'll know by then what the county will match in county funds. We match at a 60-40 rate. We look at our general allotment and the funds that we have per county, and our offer process begins generally in February or March. Now it's of each year. We're now in an annual cycle. So that's our review and purchase cycle, our acquisition cycle in a nutshell. So,
Yeah, and I think, Hannah, I think that's a good segue to the fact that for everybody that the state actually is the one that holds the easement. So the county does contribute, but the state is the holder of the easement, and that's why they make the final decisions on the mouth easements. If it's a county easement, then the county makes the final call, and you as a board make that recommendation, which then is actually pretty much a decision. But for the mouth, what you all do is a recommendation to the state board, and they make the decision.
and thank you, Wally. I do want to, I probably didn't state that clearly enough. When I say we make our offers in the ranking order, part of the vetting process will tell us whether a property is really eligible to apply for the program. Sometimes it has to do with something that we find in a deed, if there are other interests involved, such as somebody has a life estate interest in the property and they refuse to sign the application. That would be one of many examples. If we can't have every landowner sign the application, then it's not eligible to go through. So we would have to throw that one aside. But of all of the remaining applications that are eligible, we make the offers in the ranked order from the county. And yes, it is all subject to our board's approval.
That's good. That's good. Does anybody have any questions of Hannah? All right. Anything else, Hannah? Is that good?
I think we're good. I don't have anything else prepared, as I felt that the board would really have a good sense of the program since, principally the ag advisory boards throughout the state were created under our statute. So I would think that that's a big part of what you hear.
Yeah, that's great. So
Thank you, Hannah.
thank you.
Okay.
The chair calls on Megan to give us, speak on logistics.
Sure. All right, so I'll move quickly. We have a few other items to get through before we take up the business items. So this is just the section to go over some of the nuts and bolts. So we're glad to have 5 members on the board now, voting members. So a quorum takes 3. So when we send out the meeting notice, it helps when I hear back so that we know that we're going to have a quorum at a meeting. Our meetings are typically the second Wednesday of each month and usually at 6:30 p.m. unless we have a field meeting portion in non-COVID times. We've talked a little bit about we could change when our meetings are, depending on how that works for all of the board members' schedules. So we might take up that discussion a little bit later, but typically right now we are on the second Wednesday every month, as long as we have business. Some months we cancel the meeting if we have no items. And sometimes we try to do a little bit earlier in the day, such as today we started earlier. So the board package. So we put together a one-page agenda, which is what we publish on the website that the public sees, that includes all of our items. And Joe, if you want to go, I guess, to the next slide. And then we send out in mail as well as by email the full board packet. So that includes each agenda item as well as background materials, as you'll see there. And I try to send out the packets, get them out to you at least a week in advance. I email, for anyone that is on email, a scanned copy of the full package so that you have it as soon as possible to look at. And then, as I said, we try to get them in mail at least a week in advance so that you'll have them we usually try to get them out on Wednesdays with the hope that they would be there by the weekend for the Wednesday meeting. Mail can sometimes be slow, so that again is why we send it out in email in advance. When we are meeting in person, we had started this right before we had to go online, but I was sending out the package by email and then providing the hard copies and notebooks for each board member. But obviously now we're going back to mailing them. So that's hopefully we'll get back to meeting in person at some point and we can do the board books again. And go ahead to the next slide, Joe. Sorry, go back to just the basic outline agenda. So just to give an idea, this is in your board book. I think it's section 2 is there's a copy of just the shell of the agenda, and that outlines the different types of items that you may see in any given meeting. So we will typically take up, obviously, approval of the previous meeting's minutes, and then the items that the board members are looking at. We take up MALF and county easement, landowner requests and issues. So for instance, lost my notes here, but so those could be an approval of a child's lot, a family lot, any reserved rights in the easement that the board needs to look at. Sometimes we will have requests, and tonight both of the requests I think involve lot line adjustments on easement properties. So things of that nature. And then obviously in season of the applications for both MALF and or the county easements, we take up looking and ranking the easement applicant properties. We also look at number 4, the bullet there, Baltimore County permits and development applicants. And Wally will get into more details, but there we might see requests for tenant houses, legitimacy of agricultural use on a property, ag exemptions, ag subdivisions, those kinds of things. And then we may have program policy issues. I guess in there we would have the LISA whenever LISA is the ranking that the county uses and ranking the easement applicants, and sometimes the board will take up adjustments to that form.
Also making the master plan is coming up, and typically the county does rely on the ag board for advice on agricultural components of the master plan.
Okay, yep. And then we keep you updated on the status of the easements, the easement transactions, the inspections and stewardship that we keep up with. Joe will talk more about the preservation programs and your role there. And those are the main parts of the agenda. If you back up one slide, Joe, was there one more thing? No, that's it. And again, just mentioning the field meeting. So in normal times when we are able to, the board would typically meet ahead earlier in the day on the meeting day to visit any of the properties where we're taking up issues, to see them obviously in the field. And right now, whenever we need that, the staff is going out to provide photos during the slide presentation. But hopefully when we can get back to that, we can give more details and get back in the swing of the field meeting portion of our meetings.
I will warn the new members that time does vary depending how much we have to see, where they're located, and what time of year it is, since obviously we can't go look at a property in the middle of the winter when it's dark at 5 o'clock, it's pitch black. So we typically go earlier in the day. So we try to get advance notice, and if you can't make it to the field meeting, you are more than welcome to come to a normal meeting at our normal time at 6:30 or whatever time that will be. You're not you can't, it's not all or nothing. You can show up later and miss the first portion.
Right. And then the board members and staff that were out on site can give you their perspective on what they saw in the field. And that's all from me.
Well, thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan, and I'll try to move along also before my screen goes out on me. So
Call on Ms. Wiley to talk on county zoning regulations, please.
thanks, John. So let me get this on. So, okay, see if that's working. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So as Megan was indicating on the agenda, often the county seeks advice of the Agricultural Advisory Board on a number of zoning type issues. So these will be things like a tenant house or a agricultural exemption for a building, or general exemption, which is from agricultural, gets from having to go through the regular development process. We also get some nuances of the zoning, but generally we're not asking you all to get involved in that technicality. We'll present to you in each situation what the board's decision making is. So for instance, for a general exemption for agricultural purposes, there are three things that have to be decided in the county code. And one is no new roads or streets. So that's decisions made by Public Works. The zoning is appropriate. That's made by the zoning office. And the third part is it has to be for agricultural purposes. So the county looks to the Ag Board for its decision and recommendation on whether a particular activity is for agricultural purpose. So as an example, an easement, a proposal is to take a child's lot off. Typically a subdivision has to go through a very lengthy process in the county with a lot of agencies, but we have customarily taken that through as a general exemption, and that has quickened the process and reduced some of the regulatory impact on the property on the farm since it's already under easement. For a tenant house, there's basically a twofold test. And again, we will state those, and or we should be stated, or you should ask us before you're asked to make a decision on a property. So for a tenant house, the criteria is that, and Holly, I know your family's been through this a while back, you know, that the farm has to have a business operation that justifies the need for a full-time tenant, and that the person who occupies the building has to be that tenant. So again, we will remind you of those particular criteria for each of these recommendations. But it's a good relationship between the county seeking its advice from you all rather than from us or other people working in the county. I think back to what Kelly was saying, you know, years ago. There was probably everybody almost in the county who had some relative who worked on a farm or knew something about farming. And now you can probably count them on, you know, Steve can tell you, probably count them on one or two hands, you know, so we have to look to you all for this expertise. Section 404, that's the general description for different agricultural activities. And one of the things that the county zoning could ask is that if a farmer's roadside stand, if there's been a question as to whether or not they're selling their own produce, they could ask the Ag Board to go out and take a look at that particular operation and give an opinion as to whether or not they're selling their produce or not. Typically, we rely on the extension also for advice on that, which we do on a lot of issues, such as ag buildings. So that's a pretty quick review, John. And we do have these in your book if you want to peruse those. I'm sure you have lots of time. So that would be under section 3, and then another section, I think it was 8, thank you, Megan, are those standards. All right, so we'll get back to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Holly. I'd like to call, the chair would like to call Joe to give us a program, a preservation program overview and the role of the board.
Thank you, John. Excuse me. So as the Ag Board, you're going to have the most relations with 3 programs. Of the 3, the first one is going to be the Baltimore County Land Preservation Program itself. We will be going through applications very soon, so we'll be going through a ranking process, which we'll go over shortly. The other program is also located within Baltimore County. It's the Imminent Threat Program. When I'll go through these programs in more detail, but the third program, and Hannah is off here, but sometimes she may think it's the more important one, but we know better. It's the MALF program. And of course, if those that don't know, it's the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. So those are the three main programs that the Ag Board has decisions in. Of the three, the MALF program, they have the criteria for a property. Any property must be at least 50 acres unless it is adjacent to another. There are soil criterias, and they have to have some kind of development rights to sell. The compensation is 75% of fair market value. Applicants can make an offer price, but the price itself is capped at 75% of that fair market value, and the value itself is determined by a appraisal that is done. I guess now it's going to be once every 2 years. So if a property gets through, does get an appraisal, that appraisal will be good for 2 years worth of ranking if they did not make the final cut. The process for MALF is people apply. We do normally our cutoff is the May 1st. We go through a whole ranking process between us here in the county where we do a computer side, but then we also spend that time in a non-COVID world. We spend a 2 or 3 days, depending how many we get. We go out, drive out to each farm, and all the board members go through and rank through the LISA. The LISA is in your board packet, and that was tab 5. After that, the ranking does get approved by the county council. This past year for the fiscal year 21, that's kind of where we are standing right now, where I believe it goes the next couple weeks, right?
The public hearing's the 15th, and then the vote is on the 21st.
There we go. So it's coming up. Typically, this is right now, MALF, as you may have heard Hannah say, this is going through a yearly application cycle, but this does take up to 18 months to 2 years for an easement to be completed. We are now just working up and finalizing easements that applied back in fiscal year 19. We had a couple settle, but they're slowly coming in. We do monitor these also. I believe we have 200 something MALF easements in the county. Exact number I don't have written down, but we monitor about 10% of those each year. So if we do see any issues when we go out there, we do bring them back for updates to the board. Typically, you don't vote on those. They're just informational. County program is very similar to the MALF programs, where you need at least 50 acres to meet the soil criteria. You can be less 50 acres if you're adjacent to existing easements. The main difference is the price, the compensation. Everything is done by formula. So we just went through, we revamped our formula, that the board approved that a couple months ago. And the Ag Board does give, if we want to revise it or we think things need to be changed, the Ag Board does approve that. And when you go through the ranking process, it's going to be kind of the same thing. We will be accepting applications annually, when funding is available. That we're going to call upon you guys as the Ag Board to work at the LISA so that we can go through the ranking process. And when you go to monitoring stewardship, we do a third of these each year. So we go on a 3-year cycle for all our county easements. And we have about 67, Wally, I believe it is? Yes. Roughly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So somewhere right around there. So they are low enough where we get them done on a much quicker scale. So like I said, every 3 years, all county easements will be inspected. Hold on, sorry, I got to move on my little function boxes around. I can't see what's on the screen. For the third column, bear with me. Lastly is the imminent threat program. There is no size qualification, but the farmer must show that there is some kind of imminent threat to the loss of that farmland. The price itself is established by a formula. Again, the Ag Board gives input into the formula when it is revised. The applications accepted are at any time, especially if there are no funds, then obviously we can't accept applications. But the Ag Board needs to evaluate the application and makes recommendation to proceed or not to proceed. The final approval is made by the County Council. So any of these, we do believe they are lumped into the county program itself, underneath easements. As the stewardship manager for our easements, I don't recall any kind of separate classifications with these. The preservation partners, as like you said, Ann Jones represents a lot of these. We work with the different conservancy groups, the different Land Trust Alliance, and MET. So for these, the Long Green, LPT, Gunpowder, and Manor all represent one of the 4 out of the 5 rural legacy areas in the county. The 5th one, Gunpowder and Baltimore County, as in us, we oversee the 5th one, which is the coastal rural legacy area. So you may see, as Megan said, some of these agenda items, we may approve a tenant house and some of these other easements as they come in. But typically, the easements themselves oversee their own ongoings and approvals. And most importantly is outreach. We are mainly a word of mouth program where without the spread, especially from you guys as representatives of the Ag Board, we wouldn't have people coming in to apply. We wouldn't have all this protected farmland that Baltimore County does. So we always remind you that we do mailings every now and then. We do advertise, but from our understanding of talking to people, word of mouth is the best way people know. People do have lots of questions when they come in, if you've seen the advertisements, but they talk to somebody already in the program, then they can get a lot of questions answered before they come to us.
And we have the application deadline for the county program at the end of this month, so.
Yes, we do.
And on the outreach, Ann Jones has been involved in that. As Joe was saying, there's so many different programs, and whether they express interest to us or to Ann, we certainly advise people to call Ann and talk about the Rural Legacy Program and vice versa. So
Yes.
our main objective is that people find the right program for them so that they will have a good experience and talk us up.
Ollie?
Has Joe completed his, I'm not sure who's going to talk about certification and budget. That,
Yeah, I just lost my voice. Okay. Thanks, John. I'll try not to go too deep into this. The budget and the funding. So the funding for the land preservation program comes from a couple different sources. It comes from the agricultural transfer tax, it comes from bonds, and it comes from general funds. On occasion, we've had some private funds, but that's been a while. The agricultural transfer tax is a percentage that is paid if a property is taken out of agricultural use and put into some other type of use. This has really been this was a terrific concept that was done back, I'm not sure if it was the 70s or so. And at one point in time when there was a lot of development in the county, this was really generating a lot of funds. But fortunately, because we have such good growth management in the county, the funding from this component is not as significant anymore. It's typically been anywhere 250,000 a year up to 500,000 a year. This past year was actually higher than it has been in a while. It was about, I think it was close to 600,000. There is, and I'll go to it in a second, we do not have an unlimited time to spend this. We're certified county, as Hannah mentioned. We get to keep 75% of those funds. The 25% goes back to the state. But we, we use that funding. There we go. Okay. That is something that we put into the funds that go down to the state for the purchase of easements. The other funds, as I said, are county funds. So for many years, most of our funding has come from bonds. And these come up for a county citizen approval every 2 years. At one point in time, when there was also additional amount of funds in the county, we used to get general funds, but that has much less now. So really the most important funding source for this program in the county is the bond funds, and then secondarily is the agricultural transfer tax funds. If you go to Joe, the budget, and Ann loves to talk about the county budget, but as if she wants to add anything. You can take more time. This is in your folder under 9. But basically, this shows you that the county has a 5-year operational budget. So look at FY22, and you'll see on the first page we have a rural. Yeah, we actually have 2 budgets. We deal with the rural legacy and the ag pres, but we're going to mostly just talk about ag pres. So for FY22, if you look down to the second group of information, there's the general funds, which you'll see is 0. And general funds reallocated is 0. As I said, we don't get general funds at the present time, but you get the next is the proposal for a 3.9 million in future bonds. And that would be used over a 2-year period. So although it's a 5-year program, the bonds and the funding are for a 2-year cycle. So that basically means we'd have $2 million a year for those next 2 years, 22 and 23, to spend on land preservation. Plus, as I indicated previously, the agricultural transfer tax. So we had estimated that it would be on about 460,000. As I said, we were running around 230 or so a year. That's actually going to be a little bit up this year. But nevertheless, we would add that in. So from that, you'd see you basically have a $4.4 million budget that we have to work with over 2 years. We use that money then to match the state funds, and we've been very, very successful in matching state funds. And the state funds, it's a 60-40 match, which means the county puts up 1.3 million and gets 2 million back from the state, plus some additional state funds. So we run almost about a $4 million annual program for land preservation. The important thing to say lately is, due to efforts by groups like the Baltimore County Land Trust Alliance and the board, there was a considerable amount of pressure on this administration to put more money into land preservation. And there's been a commitment by the county executive and administration to step up our preservation activity. So this was really timely because, as Joe and Hannah said, the state has gone to an annual easement process. Without the additional funds, we would not be able to match fully those annual process. We'd have enough to match every 2 years. But with the proposed bond funding, as long as the voters approve it, we have sufficient funds to both match the state and also have additional money to run a county program. So in order to spend and keep getting those agricultural transfer tax funds, though, at that level of 70%, we do have to complete a certification every 5 years. And that is a document where we have to show how much we've preserved, an overall comprehensive program. What are we doing for growth management? In other words, the state doesn't want to see money going to do a lot of land preservation if there's a lot of subdivision going on in the area in which you're trying to preserve. We also have been trying to show to what extent we are making our preservation goal of 80,000, what progress we're making, and we compare that against the rate of loss of agricultural land. Again, so far we have successfully shown that we should reach that goal of 80,000 by at least by 2035, well before the amount of land available is diminished. We also indicate our monitoring inspections to show that we are maintaining the stewardship and the commitment for the preservation, and a number of other things. So we can get these reports or have a couple at the make them available to you online. So I think that's it on the budget and certification. Either back to you, John, if there's, oh, look at that. Any questions?
If there's any questions on our training session? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on with our meeting agenda then. The consideration of changes in today's agenda. Is there any changes, Wally, that we need?
No.
No changes? Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the August 12th meeting. Is there any changes that need to be made in the minutes of the August 12th meeting?
I motion we accept the minutes as presented.
Do I hear a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of accepting the minutes of August 12th, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes of August 12th have been approved. Okay, we'll move on. The next on the agenda is the James and Stacy Chenoweth of Clear Pond Farm. The request is for the approval of an overlay easement for well serving Chenoweth property located on easement property. I'd like to call upon Wally for some background information.
Thank you, John. Members of the board, this proposal by James and Stacy Chenoweth and Clear Pond Farm is for approval of an overlay over an existing well that's existing on the easement property. If you look on the aerial, Joe, if you want to put up the aerial for this, right. Thank you. You can see that the yellow is 62 acres. That is the farm that's owned by Clear Pond. And it is a portion of an original easement by the Chenoweths that was a 290-acre easement. The rest was sold to Spring Meadow Farm, David Rose's operation. But this request is just concerning the area in yellow, which is the 262 acres, which is off of Old York Road, just somewhat east of I-83. It's on the north side of the road. The issue is that when those two lots were built quite a while ago, they're both child's lots. They were taken off of the easement. The well on the first one, now you can go to the survey drawing. The well was actually located off of the property on the easement. So in the process of selling these lots, after a child's lived in the lot for 5 years, it can be sold. It was desired to get this straightened out. And so the request is for the board to make a recommendation to the state. This is a state easement, so they have final approval as to whether to approve putting a easement over that little, if you look on it, that little appendage on the box under which the lot is located, so that there would be an easement for that well use. In making this decision, the board is called upon to look and see if this would have any significant detrimental impact on the farm. I don't know, Joe, if you go back to the aerial, you'll see that where that location is, it's actually between the location of the access road to the second lot and that existing dwelling. So it's not in the middle of an agricultural area. It's an area that actually it's in lawn at the present time anyway. So I don't know if there's anyone here, if Doug Duvall or anyone's representing the Chenoweths.
No, nobody's. Nobody for this is online. So.
Okay, so back to you, John, for any board questions or discussion.
Thank you, Wally. Is there any questions or things anybody needs more information on this before voting on it?
Right, I just have an ethical question. Since David Rose farms our property, do I have a problem here?
No, no. I think what Kelly was trying to say that, and as a matter of fact, David Rose doesn't own any of this property.
Okay.
He owns the outside of that yellow line.
That's what I thought, but I'm a rule follower.
That's good. No, that's a good question. And if, we needed to, call on Kelly, we could. But in this case, David, this is not under David Rose's
Okay.
ownership.
Okay.
Okay, we need a motion for the approval of an overlay easement for the well serving the Chenoweth property located on easement property.
So moved.
Our second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion is carried. Next item is the Thomas Mullins property. The approval of a lot line adjustment between two properties. The Chair calls upon Joe Wiley to provide some information, please.
Just one correction, Mr. Chairman, this is actually a lot line adjustment between 3 properties.
Okay. Thank you.
The 3 properties in question are out off of, I got all my boxes in the way again. Cold Bottom Road, Yea Road, and I guess the Nash's property is up off Cedar Grove. So there's 3 properties. You have the Mullen property, which is 1620 Cold Bottom Road. You have Mr. Guess's property, which is 1622 Cold Bottom Road. And to the rear of that is Sandra and, is it Carl Nash?
Carl, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot line adjustment proposed. If you see the screen here, it's this greenish triangle. The property line itself goes through this front pond on Mr. Mullins' property. He would like to move that lot line to the east. That way he could protect that pond. There's a wood line here, and I do have a zoomed in area. But Mr. Getz would like to keep his property whole. So in order to do that, he is getting the purple piece here from Mr. Mullen, but it's not the acreage that he's giving up. To keep the same acreage, he's also getting some acreage from Mr. and Mrs. Nash, which is this teal portion top here. If you look the next page, as you can see, there are no real agricultural fields that are being transferred. This is mostly woodland. There are a little bit of open land down by the pond that Mr. Getz's Mr. Mullen will be getting. Excuse me. MALP does allow lot line adjustments as long as soils are still qualifying after the transfer. This is just under. We do have Mike Youngsworth here is online. We do online. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am.
There you go. Correct me. It's like 1.7 acres, right?
Yeah, it's 1.7 acres is coming from Mr. Getz to Mr. Mullen, and then the other 2 add up to exactly the same going back to Mr. Getz. And it's just to protect the pond. They're all getting older now, and they're worried that Mr. Getz sells and somebody's going to come in and destroy this pond. So it really is a protection for the pond, and everybody's in agreement. The Nashes are not getting any monetary value back for that. They're actually getting the farming rights for Mr. Mullen, which is they were doing anyway. So they're actually the only money change, or there's no money changing hands here. This is all just a land swap, basically.
And we do have a letter here where they all so.
Thank you for your information. Any more questions or discussion
Hey,
on this lot line adjustment between 3 properties?
John, I'd like to add that when it says the recommendation is a vote to approve of a lot line adjustment, particularly for new board members, the request is for approval for both going to MALF to the state, since these are state easements, and also to go to the county under what's called a development review committee, so that this lot line adjustment is approved. These rules just, again, things like changing lot lines require both county approvals and state approvals. So often we'll be asking the board for both a county and, both approval recommendation for the state and recommendation for approval of the county. So this request is for a lot line adjustment.
And just to reiterate on that too, is the county zoning already has seen this.
Okay.
So they've already looked at it and they don't have any issues with it. It's just making sure you guys are okay with it.
Right. Yeah, that's not unusual. As Mike said, he's done a good job getting anything in there. They'll make their approval contingent upon the board's recommendation.
So we can do this with one request?
Excuse me?
Done with one motion?
Yes, you can do one motion.
Okay, the motion will have to be for the approval of lot line adjustments between properties. You hear a motion?
So moved.
Would you hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the approval of the lot line adjustments between the three properties signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? So carried. Are there any more items on the agenda, Molly?
Right. There's a little bit of information on under the miscellaneous. We wanted to update you on the, the county has been involved in a work program to look at value-added agriculture. And often that's referred to by other people as agritourism. So the issue has come up about a lot of these new, the breweries or certain festivals and activities, and maybe having food on the farms and all this, that are all more of what we're seeing that people need to do to get more connection with their markets. That people want to have experiences and not just buy the food. They want to see how it's cooked, not just get it in the store. So the county's been working. We've had a task force working on this for several months now, since June, and they now have reached the conclusion of their meetings. One of the things that perhaps is of Scott's not online, but he would be interested, is that there's been an issue with respect to the exemption for agricultural buildings. So currently, if a farmer is going to build a barn, they are exempt. But that has been problematic for county agencies. And so it's been proposed by particular county agencies, several county agencies, that there be a process involved that requires some sort of approval. So that's where we are now with our recommendation. Is we're going to recommend that the definition for who is eligible for the exemption be tightened up, that it be limited to just farms and just for buildings that are primarily used for the farms. And then secondly, that there be some sort of a form submitted that shows what the building is, where it is, any potential conflicts with septic or well. And then we're also going to show that in that report that that there's been suggestion by both the community groups and by some agencies that there be some sort of approval process. We have had other members, ag committee members, who have indicated that they do not support that issue of having an approval process, but we are just going to present those opinions. All of them have to go forward to, and they will go forward to the planning board, and then the planning board will make a recommendation on that report that'll go to the council. So we can get that, we'll get that report out to all of you all as soon as we get that draft. And then of course you're welcome to testify at the planning board, which will probably, meeting will be in November. We'll get you the exact dates. The other thing was a discussion about, Holly, I know that you said you teach tonight. I'm not sure what Brenda's conflict was, but we thought that maybe Megan could call everybody, and Steve and Scott, and see if this was still the best night for everybody, or whether there was a better evening that was for everyone to meet.
I just rearranged my teaching schedule so I don't teach on Wednesdays.
Good. All right.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday.
All right, that seals the deal.
Yeah, the Wednesdays are fine for me.
Good. And John, you said that's good for you, Wednesday
I'm
nights?
fine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Holly. All right, that's it for additional information. I have then what the next meeting is the 14th
14th
Megan?
of October.
of October.
All right.
You think that will be a virtual meeting, you think, or we don't know yet, or?
Yeah, I think,
I kind of like virtual meetings. I think it's,
The
the only
county,
problem is, I don't know what burden that places on you all, and the technology is enough burden to be able to find something that can work. And so far, it looks like it's working.
Yeah, it does.
yeah, there's it's certainly an advantage that if people want to join, it's open, like Kelly was saying, it's open to the public. So there's, more of a public access and, and everybody can be comfortable and not have to drive in for some of these long meetings.
Right.
And then I don't have to give you guys dinner every time too.
And that's a big bill because we're always paying transportation.
Save the county money, right, Steve? Steve used to work in purchasing for the county for a few years.
Save a few bucks here and see if we can put it towards
Towards the easements.
preservation. Yeah, towards easements.
Yeah. I don't know, is Ann, are you still on the line? Did you want to say anything?
I am still on the line. I had to step out for a little bit, but I'm back now, and I didn't really have anything to say, believe it or not. But the only thing I was going to go back really quick, I do want to let the board know that not every county gets certified by mouth, and it is a good thing that Baltimore County does. And you shouldn't underestimate the progress that has been made and the fact that the regulations do continue to support ag, because that is a very important. Like I say, I'm from Howard County. I'm actually on the Howard County Ag Board. Howard County is not a certified county, as an example. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Ann. All right, John, back to you.
Need a motion for adjournment then?
So moved.
Okay, our next meeting is October 15th, 2020, and it probably will be a virtual meeting.
All right.
Thank everyone for attending the meeting tonight, and we'll eventually meet our new members face to face.
Okay. Look forward to it.
See you, Steve.
Okay, John, when are you going to show out?